As I stood there in the middle of the living room, her phone trembling in my hand and my heart thudding in my chest, I stared down at the messages that ripped apart everything I thought I knew. "I'm too beautiful to be tied down like this," she had written. The woman I had devoted my life to, the one I sacrificed for and loved without question, had reduced me to nothing more than a convenience. To her, I was just a steady paycheck funding her ambitions while she chased thrills elsewhere. That was the moment I decided I'd had enough. Enough pretending. Enough holding everything together for someone who didn't care. I wasn't going to be her safety net anymore. I told her to leave and began reclaiming my life, piece by painful piece. But before we dive deeper into how everything unfolded, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. And hey, if you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale like this one. The hum of espresso machines mixed with the chatter of students in the coffee shop, creating a background symphony of campus life. Ethan stood awkwardly near the counter, clutching his welcome packet like a lifeline, his eyes flitting over the menu as though it held some secret survival guide to freshman year. Just as he finally decided on a plain black coffee, a light jolt snapped him from his thoughts. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," came a melodic, confident voice. "It's fine," Ethan muttered, hoping he sounded cooler than he felt as he wiped the coffee stains from his packet. "Here, let me replace that," she said, already stepping toward the counter before he could protest. A moment later, she handed him a fresh cup. "I'm Olivia," she said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Or as my friends call me." "Ethan?" he replied, feeling warmth rush to his face. Thanks for the coffee." Olivia leaned casually against the counter, her gaze steady. "So, Ethan," she said, tilting her head, "what's your major?" "Software engineering," he answered, suddenly self-conscious about how boring it might sound. "Fashion design," she said with a grin, as if she knew how impressive it was. "I'm going to be a world-famous designer, or at least, that's the plan." Ethan chuckled nervously. "Ambitious. I like that. And you?" she asked, eyes curious. "What's your big dream?" "To, not spill coffee on anyone else today," he joked, earning a soft laugh from her. That laugh felt like a small but significant victory. In that moment, surrounded by the rich scent of coffee and the gentle hum of life buzzing around them, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. A spark. Warm, hopeful, and real. The wedding was like stepping into a dream. Twinkling fairy lights shimmered above rows of mason jars filled with wildflowers, and the soft strumming of an acoustic guitar drifted through the evening air. Ethan stood at the altar, his heart pounding in anticipation as Olivia appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in her lace gown. She was everything he had ever dreamed of, graceful, self-assured, and his. Their eyes met, and she gave him a small, knowing smile as if to say, "We're in this together." That day felt like a perfect, frozen moment, one where the rest of the world melted away. During their first dance, overwhelmed with joy, Ethan leaned in close and whispered, "I can't believe I get to call you my wife." Olivia laughed softly and rested her head on his shoulder. "You better believe it," she teased. "This is just the beginning." And it really was. The early years of their marriage were filled with laughter that echoed late into the night, whispered dreams about the future, and conversations that felt like they could go on forever. Olivia lit up every space she walked into, her excitement for life spilling over into everything they did. Olivia threw herself wholeheartedly into building her career as a social media influencer, determined to leave her mark. She spent countless hours curating content, snapping aesthetic photos, and connecting with others in the industry. Ethan, always the supportive husband, loved seeing the fire in her eyes when she talked about her plans. "Look at you, landing brand deals," he cheered one evening as she excitedly signed her first partnership contract. "We're just getting started, babe," she beamed, her excitement filling the room. Meanwhile, Ethan found solace in the steady rhythm of his own growing career as a software engineer. The long hours didn't bother him much, and he never thought twice about dropping everything when Olivia needed his help or support. He admired her ambition and believed in her dreams, even though he sometimes wondered if there was still room for the quiet, simple moments they used to share. Still, their love felt unshakable, solid, like the foundation of a home built to last. But, much like the soft glow of the twinkling lights from their wedding day, the brilliance of those early years began to dim. The shift wasn't abrupt. It crept in slowly, like the tide slipping farther and farther away from the shore until you suddenly realize how distant it has become. Ethan first noticed it during their date nights. What used to be cozy evenings spent sharing dinner and laughing together turned into Olivia obsessing over lighting and angles. "Hold this," she'd say, handing Ethan a ring light. Dutifully, he'd oblige, watching his plate grow cold while she adjusted her pose for the perfect shot. "Okay, just one more," she'd add with a grin. But one more always turned into 20. Vacations were even worse. Ethan had dreamed of holding her hand while they explored new places and shared quiet sunsets. But for Olivia, every trip became the backdrop for elaborate content creation. Instead of basking in the beauty of a sunset, she'd stage intricate photo shoots with props and coordinated outfits. "Do you even see the view?" Ethan asked one evening, watching her fixate on her phone as the sky turned gold and pink. "Of course I do," she said, barely glancing up. "I'm sharing it with my followers." Then came the Fit Queens, a lively group of gym friends Olivia had made. They were bold, carefree, and unapologetically wild. At first, Ethan thought they were harmless, a quirky addition to Olivia's ever-growing world. But it wasn't long before their influence became impossible to ignore. Nights they once spent curled up together on the couch turned into late outings, with Olivia stumbling home reeking of tequila and expensive perfume. "Just a girls' night," she'd say with a dismissive wave whenever Ethan asked where she'd been. Her carefree tone only deepened his unease. Ethan tried to hold on to his faith in her, to believe that the woman he'd fallen in love with was still there. But the cracks in their foundation kept spreading. The worst came one night when he overheard her talking on the phone. "He's fine. Just boring sometimes." Olivia's voice drifted through the thin walls of their bedroom. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. Boring. The word struck like ice, slicing through him with precision. His thoughts spiraled. Is she talking about me? The memory of her laughter, the smell of tequila, the missed moments. It all came crashing down. Doubt became a shadow in his mind, creeping through every corner of his thoughts. The house felt unervingly still, except for the steady sound of water running in the shower. Ethan sat at the edge of their bed, staring at Olivia's phone resting on the nightstand. His heart pounded in his chest, each thud louder than the last. He didn't want to invade her privacy, didn't want to give in to the nagging doubts that had been gnawing at him for weeks. But the late nights, the constant presence of her phone, the way she brushed off his concerns, it all pushed him to a breaking point. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone. Her passcode was still the same. The screen lit up, and a wave of guilt hit him, but it was quickly buried under a surge of determination. He opened her messages and scrolled past mundane conversations until his eyes landed on a group chat titled, "Fit Queens Unite." What he read felt like a punch to the gut. The chat was filled with messages mocking him. "He's so clueless. It's almost cute." One message read, followed by laughing emojis. "Girl, you deserve better. Live a little." Another one chimed in. The words blurred together as Ethan's stomach twisted. The woman he had built a life with was laughing about him behind his back, with her friends treating his loyalty like some kind of joke. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone as he kept scrolling, his breaths coming in shallow, uneven bursts. Then he saw it, flirty messages from someone named Lucas. His chest tightened painfully as he read their inside jokes, the hints at secret meetups, and a photo of Olivia wearing that black dress she had on last week. It wasn't explicit, but it was intimate, too intimate to leave any room for doubt. "He has no idea," Olivia had texted earlier that night. "I'm too beautiful to be tied down like this." Ethan's world tilted and spun. His fingers went limp, and the phone slipped from his grasp, landing on the bed. He buried his face in his hands, struggling to breathe. How could she say those things? About me? About us? The weight of it crushed him as he tried to grasp some kind of explanation, some excuse that would make this nightmare less real. But the words on that screen had been clear, brutal, and unmistakable. They cut through every last shred of hope. A wave of nausea rolled through him, and he whispered into the silence. This is who she really is now? The person I gave everything to. He wanted to scream, to hurl the phone across the room, to shatter something. Anything. But instead, he stayed frozen, his hands trembling as he reached for the phone again. With numb fingers, he began taking screenshots of the messages. He wasn't sure what he'd do with them yet, but he knew he needed proof. Something solid to remind himself that this wasn't all in his head. The sudden sound of the shower shutting off snapped him back to reality. He quickly placed the phone back on the nightstand, his heart hammering in his chest. Olivia emerged moments later, humming a soft tune as she stepped into the room, wrapped in a towel, her face aglow with casual contentment. "Good night," she said, as if nothing had happened. Ethan lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his chest crushed beneath the weight of betrayal and heartbreak. The truth was undeniable now. The woman he had loved, the woman he had vowed to spend forever with, was gone, replaced by someone he no longer recognized. Later, Ethan found himself standing alone in the dimly lit living room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The faint glow of the streetlights outside cast long shadows across the walls, and the screenshots burned in his mind like an open wound. His jaw clenched as he heard Olivia humming again, her carefree demeanor jarring against the storm raging within him. She wandered into the room, still scrolling through her phone, oblivious. "Explain to me," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Why Lucas thinks it's okay to text you like that." Olivia froze mid-step, the smile vanishing from her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone cautious, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it out toward her. "These," he said, shoving the screen in front of her face, the incriminating messages glowing in the dim light. Olivia's eyes widened as she took a step back. You went through my phone?" she asked, her voice rising with a mix of disbelief and anger. "That's an invasion of privacy." Ethan let out a bitter, venom-laced laugh. "Privacy? You're worried about privacy?" He shook his head, the anger bubbling up past his pain. "You destroyed our trust, Olivia. That's the real invasion, the invasion of us." Her face drained of color as she fumbled for words. "Ethan, it's not what you think. Those messages, they're harmless. Just jokes." "Jokes?" Ethan's voice cracked with fury. "Calling me boring? Laughing about me with your friends? Making plans with Lucas behind my back?" He gestured toward the phone, his hand shaking. "Do you really think I'm that stupid?" Olivia's defensiveness crumbled into desperation. "I can explain," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "No." Ethan's voice was sharp, unwavering. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to twist this around to make yourself the victim." He took a step back, his gaze like steel. "I've been breaking my back to support you, to believe in you. And this?" He held up the phone again. "This is what I get in return?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears that spilled over as she whispered, "Ethan, please, it was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to get this far." "Stop," he said coldly, his tone like ice. "You didn't mean to get caught. That's the truth, isn't it?" She took a hesitant step closer, reaching out toward him, but he pulled away, his expression resolute. His voice was steadier now, filled with quiet finality. "Pack your things, Olivia," he said. "You're leaving tonight." Her mouth opened in shock, and the tears flowed freely. "You can't be serious," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. "Ethan, please, we can fix this." "No," Ethan said firmly, his tone unyielding. "You've already broken us. I'm done." He walked to the hall closet, grabbed a suitcase, and began tossing her belongings into it. Olivia stood frozen, her sobs filling the unbearable silence between the sound of each item landing in the suitcase. Every shirt, every pair of shoes. Each one felt like another nail in the coffin of the life they'd built together. Ethan, she choked out, her voice ragged. I love you. He paused for a moment, his back still turned to her. Slowly, he reached up and slid his wedding ring off his finger. He placed it gently on the counter and turned to face her. His eyes were hard, unwavering. You don't get to say that anymore. When the suitcase was full, Ethan pulled out his phone and ordered an Uber. You can stay at your mom's, he said flatly. I'll send the rest of your things later. The car arrived minutes later, headlights cutting through the quiet street outside. Olivia clutched the suitcase, tears streaming down her face. Ethan, please, don't do this. He didn't respond. The pain in his chest was raw, but underneath it, he felt something else. A faint flicker of freedom. Small but undeniable. It wasn't the ending he had wanted, but it was the one he needed. The next morning, Ethan sat alone at the dining table, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. The house was so quiet, it felt both foreign and strangely liberating. For the first time in years, there was space to breathe, to think, without the constant noise of Olivia's chaos. But as he scrolled through the screenshots on his phone, anger simmered just beneath the surface. This wasn't over. Not yet. By mid-morning, Ethan had scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. Seated in a sleek, plush office, he laid out everything, the screenshots, the group chats, the messages with Lucas. The lawyer, a calm and methodical man, examined the evidence carefully, nodding as he flipped through the documents. This is solid, the lawyer said, setting the papers down with a decisive thud. We've got enough to protect your assets and build a strong case. With her behavior and those public posts, it'll be hard for her to argue against this. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt a flicker of relief. He had spent years cleaning up Olivia's messes, trying to hold things together. Now, she would finally have to face the fallout of her own choices. Meanwhile, Olivia had turned to her most familiar weapon, social media. Her Instagram feed became a gallery of cryptic, dramatic posts. One photo showed her gazing wistfully out of a window, captioned, "When love turns into control, it's time to set yourself free." Another post was a selfie with mascara smudged beneath her eyes, reading, "Betrayed, but not broken." At first, the comments were flooded with sympathy. Heart emojis, stay strong messages, and supportive comments poured in. But the cracks in her narrative began to show. Ethan's silence was louder than any post she could make, and soon people began questioning her side of the story. One comment under a post stood out. "Didn't you cheat on him though? Maybe try taking some accountability instead of blaming others." Others chimed in, and slowly, the tide began to turn. Sponsors quietly pulled their support, and her once loyal fan base started to dwindle. Olivia's attempt to cast herself as the victim backfired in spectacular fashion. As the court date approached, Ethan felt an unexpected sense of calm. His lawyer had prepared him well, and the mountain of evidence they had gathered left little room for doubt. Still, as he walked into the courtroom that morning, a knot of anxiety twisted in his chest. His eyes drifted to Olivia, who sat at the other end of the room. Her once polished, confident demeanor was gone. The vibrant influencer he used to know looked pale, worn down by the public backlash and the strain of everything falling apart. But Ethan couldn't summon any pity. This was the bed she had made, and if it wasn't strong enough to hold her, she would have to face it alone. The proceedings were swift and clinical. The evidence was overwhelming: screenshots of messages, records of her extravagant spending, and her own reckless social media posts. Olivia's lawyer tried to mount a defense. Olivia's lawyer did his best to paint her as misunderstood, but it was a losing battle from the start. When the judge delivered the final ruling, Ethan felt a massive weight lift from his shoulders. He retained full ownership of the house, his savings were protected, and Olivia was left with little more than her car and a modest savings account. Olivia shot him a look as the verdict was read. A mixture of anger, disbelief, and something that almost resembled regret. But Ethan didn't meet her gaze. He simply nodded at his lawyer, stood up, and walked out of the courtroom, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. The days that followed felt like stepping into an entirely new life. Ethan began reclaiming his home, boxing up the remnants of Olivia's presence. Her ring lights, stacks of delivery boxes, and piles of workout gear. The space felt emptier but cleaner, like a blank slate waiting to be filled with something meaningful. Olivia's life, in stark contrast, seemed to spiral further out of control. She tried to double down on her independent woman persona, flooding her social media with motivational quotes and attempting to pivot toward a self-love brand. But the internet doesn't forget, and her past choices clung to her like a shadow. Her sponsorship deals disappeared one by one. Her follower count dwindled. Her desperate attempts to stay relevant fell flat. Ethan watched all of it from a distance, disinterested in engaging. He didn't need to prove anything. Not to her, not to anyone. While Olivia flailed, he moved forward. With the divorce behind him, Ethan began to focus on himself for the first time in what felt like forever. He returned to the gym, not to seek validation but to find peace. Each lift, each step on the treadmill, felt like another step away from the man he had been when he was with Olivia. A man buried in her chaos and lost in her shadow. Work became another anchor in his life. Without constant distractions pulling him in every direction, Ethan poured his energy into his career. His dedication paid off when he earned a promotion, not just boosting his confidence but symbolizing the stability he had fought so hard to preserve. He also reached out to old friends, the ones he had unintentionally drifted away from during his marriage. One evening over drinks, his best friend Nathan raised a glass in a toast. To Ethan, free, happy, and finally at peace. Ethan clinked his glass, a small smile forming on his face. For the first time in a long time, the words felt true. Looking back, Ethan could see the journey for what it was. A painful, messy, but necessary chapter in his life. The love he had for Olivia had been real, but so had the betrayal. And now, standing on the other side of it, he understood something important. His greatest victory wasn't winning in court or watching Olivia's facade crumble. It was reclaiming his own life and discovering the strength to start fresh. The future was his again, and for the first time in years it felt bright. The days of chaos and heartache were finally behind him. Mornings became something he looked forward to instead of something he dreaded. The house, once cluttered with Olivia's props and filled with her endless demands, was now quiet and orderly. But it wasn't just the physical space he reclaimed. He'd taken back the emotional space, too. He dove into self-care with a determination he hadn't realized he possessed. The gym became his sanctuary, not a place for punishment, but for renewal. Each rep and every mile on the treadmill felt like a small but significant victory. His body grew stronger and so did his mind. With every drop of sweat, he shed some of the bitterness and resentment that had clung to him for so long. Reconnecting with old friends brought a kind of joy he hadn't felt in years. One night over dinner, Nathan raised his glass again, this time with a grin. To peace and quiet. Ethan laughed and clinked his glass. To new beginnings. The words carried more weight than he'd expected. This wasn't just a casual toast. It was a declaration. He was finally free to shape his life the way he wanted, without compromise or conflict. Solo travel became another revelation for him. Ethan packed his bags and hit the road, ready to explore the places he'd always dreamed of seeing. No cameras, no staged photos. Just him, the open world, and the quiet hum of possibility. One crisp morning in a small mountain town, he sat on a hill and watched the sun rise over the horizon. As the sky blossomed with hues of gold and amber, a realization washed over him. He didn't need anyone else to feel whole. For so long, he had handed the keys to his happiness to someone else, trusting them to steer. But now, he understood that his happiness had always been his to create. In this newfound clarity, Ethan felt like he was finally flourishing. Without Olivia's constant whirlwind of drama, he could pour his energy fully into his goals. His hard work paid off. His leadership and dedication earned him a well-deserved promotion. It wasn't just his technical skills that stood out anymore. It was the quiet confidence that radiated from him. His colleagues noticed it too. The once hesitant, unsure man had been replaced by someone self-assured and focused. Reflecting on everything he'd been through, Ethan could see the red flags he had ignored in the past. But now he vowed never to overlook them again. Olivia's betrayal had been heartbreaking, but it had also taught him a valuable lesson: to value himself and set firm boundaries. He finally understood that trust had to be earned, not given away freely, and that prioritizing his own well-being wasn't selfish, it was essential. The bitterness that once clouded his heart had faded, making room for something better: gratitude. He was grateful for the lessons he had learned and the strength he had gained. The man who used to stay silent in the face of disrespect was gone. In his place stood someone who knew his worth and refused to settle for anything less. One evening, Ethan sat on his porch, sipping a drink as the sky melted into shades of orange, pink, and violet. He let himself smile. Just a small, quiet smile. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his. For the first time in years, the future felt wide open, full of hope and possibility. This was his second chance. A chance to live for himself, to embrace the freedom he had fought so hard to reclaim. Looking back, Ethan could finally see his journey for what it was: a painful but transformative chapter that had reshaped his life. He had learned the value of trust, not just in others but in himself. He understood now that self-respect was non-negotiable, and moving forward didn't mean erasing the past, it meant growing from it. There had been moments when the betrayal felt insurmountable, like a weight too heavy to carry. But those same moments had forged a strength he never knew he possessed. Now, standing on the other side of it all, Ethan didn't feel victorious over Olivia. He felt victorious over his old self, the man who once doubted his own worth, ignored red flags, and gave away too much of himself. As Ethan closed this chapter of his life, he did so with gratitude. Gratitude for his freedom, for his growth, and for the endless possibilities ahead. He raised his glass to the quiet night sky and smiled. Life's pretty damn good.